What happens when a man inherits the greatest empire on earth, but cares more about a painting of a sparrow than the politics of a kingdom? What happens when an emperor is more interested in the color of a flower at dawn than the machinations of his court? The answer is one of the most fascinating reigns in Mughal history. Jahangir, whose name means conqueror of the world, was in many ways the least warlike emperor the Mughals ever produced. He was an artist, a naturalist, a diarist, a lover, and he was quietly, completely, and perhaps dangerously dominated by the most powerful woman in Mughal history. This is the story of Emperor Jahangir, and of Nur Jahan, the woman who ruled an empire from behind a curtain. Jahangir was born in 1569, the son Akbar had prayed for at the tomb of the Sufi saint Sheikh Salim Chishti. He was named Salim in honor of that saint. From childhood it was clear he was different from his father. Where Akbar was restless, military, and driven, Salim was contemplative, artistic, and self-indulgent. As a young man he developed a serious addiction to wine and later to opium, habits that would shadow his entire life and reign. The relationship between father and son became deeply troubled. In 1600, impatient for the throne, Salim rebelled against Akbar, declaring himself independent ruler of Allahabad. He even ordered the assassination of Akbar's closest advisor and friend Abul Fazl. The wound between father and son never fully healed. They reconciled, but the trust was broken. When Akbar died in 1605, Salim took the throne and gave himself the name Jahangir, conqueror of the world. Once on the throne, Jahangir revealed himself as perhaps the greatest patron of painting in Mughal history. Under his father Akbar, Mughal painting had developed into a magnificent tradition, blending Persian, Indian, and European styles. Under Jahangir it reached its absolute peak. He employed hundreds of painters at court and personally supervised their work with an expert eye. He could look at a painting and identify the hand of every artist who had contributed to it, even when a painting had been worked on by 5 or 6 painters simultaneously. He commissioned extraordinary naturalistic paintings of birds, animals, and flowers with a scientific precision that would not look out of place in a modern field guide. His court painters produced images of such delicate beauty that art historians today consider them among the finest paintings ever produced in Asia. Jahangir's eye for beauty was his greatest gift, and perhaps his greatest distraction from ruling. For all his self-indulgence, Jahangir was not without genuine nobility of character. One of his first acts as emperor was to hang a chain of gold outside his palace window, attached to a large bell. Any subject of the empire, no matter how poor, how low in status, how far from the court, could pull that chain. The bell would ring. Jahangir himself would come to the window and hear their petition personally. He called it the chain of justice. It was not merely symbolic. Jahangir actually came to the window. He actually heard the petitions. He actually intervened in cases of injustice. Historians record numerous instances of Jahangir overruling his own nobles and officials to protect the rights of ordinary people. In an age when emperors were gods, Jahangir chose to be accessible. It remains one of the most remarkable gestures of any Mughal emperor. In 1611, Jahangir attended the annual spring market held within the imperial harem, the Nur Mahal Bazaar. Among the women selling goods was a widow named Mir-u-en-Nisa, daughter of a Persian noble who had served in Akbar's court. She was 34 years old. Jahangir was 42. He saw her, and was so struck that he immediately declared his intention to marry her. He gave her the name Nur Jahan, Light of the World. What followed was the most extraordinary partnership and the most extraordinary transfer of power in Mughal history. Nur Jahan was not simply beautiful. She was one of the most intelligent, politically astute, and administratively capable people in the entire empire. Jahangir, increasingly incapacitated by his addictions, handed her more and more responsibility. And she handled it with absolute mastery. The extent of Nur Jahan's power was without precedent in Mughal history. Coins were struck in her name, something no Mughal woman had ever achieved. Imperial farmans, royal decrees, were issued in her name alongside Jahangir's. She sat behind a screen at court audiences and whispered decisions to Jahangir, who announced them as his own. She controlled the appointment of governors, the granting of titles, and the distribution of imperial patronage. She commanded armies. She negotiated with foreign powers. When the British East India Company sought trading rights in the Mughal Empire, it was Nur Jahan they had to impress, not Jahangir. She hunted tigers from the back of an elephant. She designed gardens and buildings. She wrote poetry. She was, in every meaningful sense of the word, the ruler of the Mughal Empire for nearly 15 years, while her husband painted birds and drank wine. One of Jahangir's most extraordinary legacies is his autobiography, the Tuzuk-i-Jahangiri or Jahangir. Written in his own hand across decades of his reign, it is one of the most remarkable documents in Mughal history. Jahangir wrote about everything. He described the precise colors of flowers he encountered on his travels. He recorded the behavior of animals with the eye of a naturalist. He wrote about his dreams, his fears, his loves, and his failures with unusual honesty for a monarch. He described his addiction to wine and opium not with shame but with matter-of-fact candor. He wrote about Nur Jahan with undisguised adoration. He recorded battles, diplomatic encounters, the details of paintings he commissioned, and the precise measurements of fish he caught. The Jahangir name is a window into a mind that was curious, sensitive, self-aware, and deeply human, rare qualities in any ruler of any age. Jahangir's later years were clouded by rebellion, and this time it was his own son who turned against him. Prince Khurram, the future Shah Jahan, had been Jahangir's favorite son and his designated heir. But Nur Jahan feared Khurram's growing power and began to favor a different prince, Shahryar, whom she had married to her daughter from her first marriage. The rivalry at court grew poisonous. In 1622 Khurram rebelled. He raised armies and fought his father's forces for 4 years, a brutal civil conflict that exhausted the empire and broke Jahangir's heart. The rebellion ultimately failed. Khurram submitted. But the damage was done. The father who had once called this son his greatest joy now looked at him across a gulf of betrayal that neither fully acknowledged. It was a pattern, the Mughal cycle of sons rising against fathers, repeating itself with tragic inevitability. By the 1620s Jahangir's health was failing rapidly. Decades of heavy drinking and opium use had taken their toll on a body that was aging faster than its years. He suffered from asthma. He had difficulty breathing at lower altitudes. The court spent increasing amounts of time in the cool mountain air of Kashmir, which Jahangir loved above all places on earth. He wrote that if he were ever forced to choose between Kashmir and paradise, he would choose Kashmir. Even as his body failed, his artist's eye never dimmed. From his sickbed he continued to commission paintings and observe the natural world with the same delicate attention he had brought to it all his life. Nur Jahan managed the empire with increasing urgency as it became clear her husband was dying. She nursed him. She fought for him. She held the court together by sheer force of will. In October 1627 the imperial procession was making its way back from Kashmir to Lahore. The mountain air that Jahangir loved had become medically necessary, but even the mountains could no longer hold death back. On October 28, 1627 Jahangir died in the hills near Bimba, in the mountains he had loved so much. He was 58 years old. He had ruled for 22 years. The court that had functioned largely under Nur Jahan's direction immediately plunged into a brutal succession struggle. Nur Jahan backed Shahryar. Prince Khurram, Shah Jahan, moved fast and ruthlessly. He won. Nur Jahan was pensioned off, given a generous income but stripped of all political power. She spent the remaining 18 years of her life in Lahore, writing poetry, overseeing the construction of her father's tomb, and mourning the emperor who had loved her completely. Jahangir's legacy is unique among the Mughal emperors. He did not expand the empire significantly. He was not a great military commander. He was not an administrative genius. But he gave the world something equally precious, a vision of beauty so refined, so exquisite, so completely realized that it has never been surpassed in Indian art. The paintings produced during his reign remain among the most treasured objects in the world's great museums. His autobiography remains one of the most intimate and human documents produced by any ruler in history. And the woman he loved, Nur Jahan, demonstrated for all time that power has no gender. That intelligence and capability, given the right circumstances, can transcend every barrier that society constructs. Jahangir conquered the world only in name. But in art and in love, he conquered something more lasting. When Shah Jahan took the throne in 1628, he inherited an empire that was still the most powerful on earth, but one that had been quietly drifting under Jahangir's gentle and distracted hand. Shah Jahan would prove to be something very different from his father. Where Jahangir was gentle and artistic, Shah Jahan was grand and architectural. Where Jahangir wrote about flowers, Shah Jahan built monuments. And one monument above all others would define his reign, his love, and his legacy. In our next episode, we tell the story of Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan's son, one of the most controversial and consequential emperors in Indian history. A man of iron discipline and deep religious conviction whose long reign would simultaneously bring the Mughal Empire to its greatest geographical extent and plant the seeds of its eventual destruction. That story is coming next. Subscribe to the history class. See you in the next class. Disclaimer: the information presented in this video has been researched and compiled from multiple historical sources including books, academic papers, encyclopedias, and historical records. While every effort has been made to ensure accuracy, history is a subject of ongoing research and interpretation. Different historians and sources may present varying accounts of the same events. We do not claim this to be the definitive or only version of events. Viewers are encouraged to explore multiple sources and form their own informed opinions. The creators of this channel are not responsible for any inaccuracies, omissions, or misinterpretations that may exist in this content. This video is intended purely for educational and informational purposes.